Well, hello and warm and joyful greetings to you, beloveds, today. Welcome to Nurture the Soul, and I am your co-host today, Reverend Ellie Hutchison, Minister for Church and Community Engagement with our Faith Info team. And we are a part of the Love of Church at the national setting for the United Church of Christ. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar sharing practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources for engaging critical topics for local churches and the people practitioners of faith. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God, from cultural and community organizing to congregational leadership and worship and theology to resourcing small and rural churches, from ministry with youth and children to a wide range of justice issues. We feature guest artists, authors, key leaders, thought movement makers. Nurture the Soul stays current to how the gospel is alive at this time. We hope that this is a space of connection, of community and nurture. And together we can bring our church, our community, and our world towards the world that God imagines for all of us. Join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul, and from time to time, look for other special offerings. We are always looking for ways to produce opportunities to engage you, and you can find a full list of our upcoming digital programming offerings at theucc.org or at any of our social media platforms. Friends and beloveds, if these conversations move you, if what's offered here helps to enhance your ministry or your soul, please do consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your prayerful and financial support helps programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. So thank you for supporting us, and thank you for being with us today. And now I'm turning it over to my esteemed colleague, somebody who I have enjoyed so much working with over the last couple months, Reverend Roberto Ochoa. Welcome.
Gracias, Reverend Ellie. Buen dia, everybody, and thank you for joining us today as we talk about the thriving of our UCC small town rural churches. It is my honor today to have with us members of what is the Coalition for UCC STAR, which is the Small Town and Rural Churches and Ministries. And it started about 3 years ago. And it is a grassroots organization that has been formed recognizing the needs of raising of voices in the rural and small town areas to the wider church. And today we have three amazing folks that will be sharing their stories today, especially and particularly from the Pennsylvania experience. Again, I am the Reverend Roberto Ochoa, and I am your UCC Minister, National Minister for Ethnic Inclusion, as well as Congregational Support for our rural and small town membership churches. So thank you again for being with us, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panels for today. I'm going to begin with Reverend Amelia Price, who serves with the good people of St. Paul, Verdelia, outside Salisbury, Salinsgrove, Pennsylvania, about an hour north of the Commonwealth capital of Harrisburg. Amelia serves as a chaplain to the Central Association, Penn Central Conference, and is secretary-treasurer of the Central Association. Amelia works with the UCC Coalition for Small Town and Rural Churches and Ministries with a special emphasis. Her passion is for the need to bring technology and internet access to the rural areas, and especially to those underserved communities. She is the co-chair of the Rural Ministry Steering Committee, working on a resolution for official recognition at the national setting. She also serves as chaplain at Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, PA, as a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate, a peer and options counselor. And she is also a wife, a mother, and grandmother to 3 beautiful grandbabies, she says. So welcome, Amelia. How are you today?
All is well.
Well, so good to see you, and looking forward to speaking to you more.
As am I.
Our next panel is the Reverend Dr. Bonnie Bates, who began her work as the Penn Northeast Conference Minister the Penn Northeast Conference Minister since 2017. Prior to coming to Penn Northeast, she served as the EOAWRA Association's Associate for Congregational Vitality and Development. Her role there was to support pastors and congregations in transitions, assist with search and call, work with congregational revitalization, and explore new church starts. She received her Master of Divinity degree and Doctor of Ministry degree in Transformational Leadership from Colgate Rochester Divinity School. She has done a lot serving churches all over the New York Conference, and she's done a lot of great work doing at various boards. But this is what I find very intriguing about you, Bonnie, is that her hobbies include singing and reading and hiking and fly fishing. She's an outdoor kind of person. She once sang with the National Choir in Carnegie Hall, Constitutional Hall, the White House, the Royal Albert. You are one amazing person, Bonnie, that I didn't even know. And I've been working with you for 5 years. So she resides in Whitehall, Pennsylvania. And one of her grandsons is an adult who lives in Rochester, New York. And her son, Sam, and his wife, Kim, and their 4 children reside in North Carolina. How you doing, Bonnie?
I'm great. I can't help it. I've done a lot of stuff. I'm old.
We're abundant in our age.
Abundantly aged. I like that better.
We're abundantly aged. I can't wait to talk to you further.
Great. Thanks, Roberto.
And then last but not least, it's my honor to introduce Mr. Tom Kroner, who is a lifelong member of Trinity United Church of Christ in Berlin, Pennsylvania, serving there in numerous capacities along with the Penn West Conference Board and committees. He feels blessed to be the 7th generation caretaker of the family farm dating back to 1780. 1780. Working with his son in preparation for the 9th generation. Wow. His Bachelor of Science degree from Penn State in Ag Economics and Rural Sociology has allowed him to serve farmer-owned food production and manufacturing organizations by building consensus and envisioning the future through respectful conversations. He is anxiously awaiting God's next assignments. So good. Did I say? And he also serves on the United Church of Christ Board of Directors. Welcome, Tom.
Good to be here with you.
I'm glad to see you. I'm looking forward to talking to you further. So welcome all of you to this. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with Bonnie, who's done so much. And I was wondering if you can talk to us about why and how did you become involved with the STAR movement, the small town and rural church ministries. What brought you to this, and what brings you passion in your experience?
Well, I grew up in a small town. And so I've always had a passion for small town churches and small town ministries. That's always been really important to me. My first call was to a small town, a 3,500 person community that was a dairy farming town. It was a federated church, and we didn't have a lot of resources and a lot of connection to either the conference or the national setting. And so I guess my passion has always been about how to resource the small church so that in effect, the small town and rural churches can amplify their ability to serve the people they serve. Often we measure churches by numbers, right? What's the budget? How many people are in worship? But the vitality of a congregation doesn't have anything to do with numbers.
Right.
Many of our small congregations are the community hub and center. They're the only church in 20 miles around them. They're the only place where people can come and worship. And often the resourcing that we do, either as a conference or as a national setting, is focused on the larger churches. It's focused on churches that worship over 100 people. It's focused on a particular theological perspective, which may not be the theological perspective of our rural churches. And so I have always been passionate about how we serve best our rural communities. And I was excited when we coined STAR, small town and rural churches, because I think they are stars. In Northeast Pennsylvania, in my conference, 67% of the churches are rural or small town churches. That actually means that if we're only providing resources to mid-size and large churches, we're eliminating 2/3 of the support that we need to offer to congregations. And if we truly believe that the congregation is the center of our denomination, then we need to be focused on who those folks are, what they need, and how we can resource them. Now, I've been passionate about small churches forever. However, Roberto and I connected and began to think, we ought to pull some small town church people together, pastors and association members, conference ministers, folks who are lay folks who are leading in those congregations, and begin to talk about what it is they need, as opposed to presuming that we could define it. So pre-pandemic, so that makes it almost 4 years now, we began to have some monthly gatherings for conversation and just to talk about what it is the church needs. What is it that small town and rural churches need? What access do they need? What resources do they need? How can we support them theologically? How can we support them with search and call, which is a challenge across the entire denomination, but especially challenging for a small town church? I think it's really true that across our nation, more than 60% of the UCC churches are small churches. And that means that we're not resourcing them in the same way that we need to be resourcing. That's one of the reasons why we're even talking about formalizing this coalition. We started as a resource hub to share ideas and thoughts and to bring people to talk to us about what might help the congregations. But what we really need to do now is say, how can we make sure that our voice is heard? Roberto and I have done workshops at General Synod, but we don't necessarily have a voice at General Synod as small town and rural churches. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're looking at formalizing the coalition. And I will be passionate about small town and rural churches, probably until I am in the embrace of God.
I hear you. And how do you, as conference minister, how do you bring that message within your own conference and as a member of the Council of Conference Ministers?
Well, one of my goals as the conference minister is to assess what churches need. So we have a congregational vitality team in the Penn Northeast Conference, and we have a local congregational support working group that's part of our committee on ministry. We've done surveys with our churches. We've gone out and spoken to our churches. We've established ways to celebrate the successes of our small town and rural churches. In addition to that, we've also provided coaching, which is something that I think congregations desperately need, particularly if you're a bivocational part-time pastor. How is it that you can do everything? Right? So you actually need somebody to come and support you, somebody to come from the conference and provide resources. So I think those are some of the things that we're doing. And I think I bring that voice to the Council of Conference Ministers because I have a majority small town and rural church conference.
And what's the conversation, if I may ask, that you've experienced speaking to your colleagues on the conference as conference ministers regarding the challenges that they may face within their own conferences with star churches?
I think that they're having the same difficulties that I'm having. How do we provide pastoral leadership? How do we grow up lay leadership in the church so that we can then move them into leadership of the congregation for worship and for resourcing? How is it we fund churches? How is it we work with congregations to convince them, and I know you're going to talk about this next time, that an ecumenical partnership may be the way to success to maintain a congregation in a small town or a rural community? Those are the kinds of conversations we have, as well as conversations about how we can grant fund some initiatives that will serve those small towns and rural churches. We have some conferences that are even more small town and rural than Northeast Pennsylvania is.
Mhm.
And so we share those conversations about the commonalities. And I think our desire to continue to resource people in an effective way that meets their needs, not our needs, right? I mean, I don't want to define this from my perspective. I want to define the support from the perspective of the local congregation.
And since starting this ministry back in 2019, what strides have you seen with the coalition or within our star churches?
The coalition has become self-identified. It has become self-motivated. It has become a resource for the folks who sign on when they can at a monthly meeting and the folks who get the recording of our meetings when they're not able to be with us. We have continued to provide ideas for resources through the coalition, and I think that's really important. The thing that we're moving toward now is that the coalition members are steering themselves. I think when you and I began the process, we sort of had the facilitator role, and that's the task that we undertook to make this begin to happen. I've backed off that a little. We still host the Zoom from Penn Northeast, and we still do the recording and get those sent out. But the coalition is becoming interdependent as it becomes independent. The members are depending on each other more and more. And they are becoming independent in their thinking about how we can move forward in a way that lets the voice be heard, because the voice needs to be heard.
And like I've noticed in some of the chatting that's going on, what are some of the gifts that we've discovered in this journey from your perspective of the importance of our small town and rural churches and what gifts they bring to the wider church?
Small town and rural churches are even more community connected than our larger churches are. They are the community hub. Everybody knows they're there. They have personal relationships and mission going on in their communities. And that's a gift they can bring to the rest of us. One of the other gifts that I see is a passion for both the congregation and a passion for moving forward into the ways that we can strengthen our small town and rural churches. They are really the hub of who we are in our United Church of Christ communities, which is not discounting the large churches who have resources, but our small town and rural churches often don't have resources. And so they need to share with each other. And I think the relationship building and the bridging the theological gap between the community's belief and opinions and systems and the theological approach of our pastors and congregations, the ability to navigate that is a real strength of our small town and rural churches. They have the capacity to bring people together in a unifying way, following Jesus and focusing on that as opposed to the difference.
Yeah, I've seen, like, personally working with you, and have learned that because of the fact that there's that dependency in the relationship,
Yep.
the so-called purple church, that
Mhm.
is that because of the relationships within, that they've learned to navigate some of the issues facing our country or facing communities in a
Mhm.
way that they may not how to navigate within their disagreements, but
Sure.
yet somehow keep those relationships without, being polarizing because of the fact they need each other.
Well, and I think the reality of the small town and rural church is that we understand the big tent. We get the big tent of the UCC. We know that we can all come together to follow Jesus as the head of the church, to in fact focus on our triune God, to use scripture as our foundation, but that we don't have to be the same. That it is okay if we disagree about almost everything else. And in lots of cases, we do. But that's less important because the things that hold us together in similarity are much bigger, much deeper than the things that separate us.
Thank you, Bonnie. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate that. Amelia,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon to you. You have been with part of the coalition from the get-go. I remember when Bonnie and I did our first presentation, there was, what, 3 or 4 people, and there you were. There you were. And you've been with us every step of the way. So it's always great working with you. And what I always learn something new from you because you're in there. You are a pastor in a small town, you're in there, and you try to keep the communications open between your local congregation and your association conference and national. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Vermilion at St. Paul's, right? St. Paul's in Vermilion, right?
St. Paul's Verdilla
Verdilla.
is a village, and St. Paul's Verdilla now consists of 3 houses and our church. So when you talk about being the community hub, I'm flashing because that is exactly us. But St. Paul's Verdilla is somewhat of a microcosm because they were there when there was a town, when there was a school, when there was a general store, when there was a post office. And those things don't exist anymore, but the church does. And when you talk about the relationships, that's what holds us together. That's the glue. And the best way to describe that is how we navigated masks in our church. We had a segment of people who did not want to wear masks. The reasons were as varied as what we heard reported in various outlets. But we as a church sat down together, the people who knew because they were medical people, people like me who were chaplains in a hospital, understood the benefits of it. And we said, if we're going to be together, this is what we have to do. Because we have people with compromised immune systems. We have people regularly worshiping with us in their 90s who are vulnerable. What is more important to our body? Is it to be together or fight about masks? We wore masks. Now, it helps that a lot of these people are related. So you have the family component of the familial presence. But when you talk about relationships in an area like this, you have a situation that was not what I was familiar to me. I am a transplant. I came to Port Trevorton when I married my husband. We live on the farm that his wife's family has had since 1895. So when I look out my window, I look at ancestral land. So I'm somewhat of a zealot. That's the beauty of it. The downside is at my church, I can't even send a text. it is an unserved community for economic reasons. And that limits the growth of this area in some significant ways. But I came here as much because I was called to this church as I married a person who's not really from here, but is assumed to be here because he married, his first wife was a local girl. So I feel like I was grafted into his graft of his tree, which gave me a place and a voice, which I take very, very seriously.
And so what have been, so how was it going through the pandemic without, like many churches, you were able to use some form of technology, Facebook, streaming, Zooming, how were you able to get through the pandemic? I mean, did everyone agree to, did you never close as a
We
church?
did close. We closed for approximately 23 weeks in 3 different sections. I discovered again that our God has a wild imagination. As a techno geek who sees a great deal of potential in technology, I'm called to a church that has no microphones. There is no cell service. And many of our people think computers are going to eat them. So we again had to sit down and say, okay, folks, some of you are on Facebook, some of you can text, some of you do email. How are we going to navigate this together? And the one thing that was said is that we cannot do anything that is going to exclude anyone. So as we went down the list of our possibilities, we realized that we still had people who had landline phones with dials. So they could not get anything, we thought, over the phone. We could not do Facebook Live because there were people who could not get any signal at all, either at the church or their home. So we devised a printed weekly mailing, which was a combination sermon, newsletter, motivational piece. We discovered a way to do a conference call that allowed any kind of device to call in, and we did weekly prayer meetings, we did weekly Bible studies by this conference call method. And we found that it was extremely familiar to a lot of our people who were used, yes, Bonnie's head is going, they were used to printed materials. So techno geek that I am, I was allowed, notice I didn't say reduced, I was allowed to use my journalism background in a way that I had not used it in 40 years. So when we did open back up, it's turned out to be permanently now. We had a lot of people say, I really miss having you in my mailbox every week. So we're talking about how to get that connection back.
Recently, I just heard that they have defined innovative. The innovation is defined as some ways to be more expansive. And you sound like this was a great example. Small town, small rural church innovation that was expansive because you made clear that it couldn't exclude anyone, and you
Yes.
found ways to be reach out to folks. That's great. So can you tell me just a little bit about what it is to be a pastor in your area in PA, and also the relationship that you feel that your local church, your local congregation has with the association conference and national?
It's very interesting. I am a trivocational pastor. I serve my church. I serve the association in several ways. I also assist with my husband's business. So you talk about time management and boundaries. The boundary is a little bit like a badminton net because it's got the big holes in it, not the little tennis net holes. But you realize the call is a lifestyle. I was not raised in small towns, so this has been an education to me to learn about the diverse and energetic and fascinating life of small towns. This is a village. This is an unincorporated village. And to see these families and to see these people accept this outsider. I wasn't even born in Pennsylvania. And that makes me an outsider. Yeah. But I learned naturally, not insincerely, to be curious. The running joke in the 7 years at my church is I need a family tree of the church to show me how you people are connected and related. We just had another revelation on Sunday of a familial connection that even my husband didn't know about. So you learn to be curious, to be inquisitive, to listen. Because once you ask the question, then you shut up. And you let people tell their stories, however they need to be told. And you hear not just what they're saying, but you discern the things that they're not saying.
Yes.
Because there is some grief. You know, there's not a town called Verdilla anymore. But we represent the good of what was. You talk about a community hub. The church has had power when the families that come to us haven't. We maybe can't make any phone calls, we can't do any internet, but we can be warm. We've got water and we've got bathrooms. And that has been used in the surrounding larger community when it's been necessary. And it's been a learning experience. I was raised in many places. I've moved around a great deal. I landed here and chose this to be my home. And it has embraced me. It has challenged me. And I have the privilege of serving them in a variety of ways. And that is also one of the challenges because there are fewer and fewer people in our association, in our conference to do the work that needs to be done. The secretary-treasurer role for 60-some years, 66 years was a separate set of positions. It has had to be combined because the needs are different. People to do it are different. And we're figuring out what's going to be next.
Well, thank you, Pastor Amelia. And thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself and the good folks out in St. Paul.
Thank you.
So great. I'm looking forward also to talk to Tom. How you doing, Tom?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'm learning a lot today.
All right, all right. So Tom, tell us a little bit more about, where you're from near Berlin. Is it Berlin or Berlin?
Berlin, as in Germany.
Okay. In Massachusetts, it's Berlin. So and they always could tell that I was the outsider because I used to say Berlin. So anyway, Tom, tell me a little bit about, your background, your narrative about, from growing up where you're from.
Well, I literally grew up in the church, and so I've been 81 years going to the same church, and that I look at it as a family. And even though we're not related to everybody, we're related to a lot of folks in the community. And my ancestors have been in this community since 1780s. So being rural, we tend to value the love of our neighbors, because you never know when you're going to be stranded out in a rural road somewhere and not be able to get home or get to your destination. And there's a lot of people willing to stop and help you get out of the ditch or snowbank, as it quite often is in this country. Um, and so, you know, it doesn't matter. People will stop and see if you're okay. And that's the community. That's the neighbor, love of neighbor environment that we're in. And when I get into some of the more urban settings and all, and hear what's on the news and people shouting at each other and almost screaming and in anger, I don't know what that environment is. That's not normal for those of us in the country. And I think that is an important social aspect that we benefit from and are blessed with. And I think that if we can help share some of that community with the rest of our neighbors, maybe we can learn something, because I've learned a lot from the animals that I've worked with in my life. And we had references made earlier about relationships. And if you want to work with an animal, you're going to develop a relationship. And the first element of that relationship is trust. You have to establish trust with that animal, with that human being, because we're all part of the animal kingdom that God created. And our first reaction and emotion is to flee from what we're afraid of. And well, they say either fight or flight. You know, you got to do one or the other. And so until you establish that element of trust, you can't really communicate. You can't really learn about what the other person is, and you can't establish that trust. So it's very elementary to the culture of the rural area, which I cherish dearly. It's part of my DNA, and I'm truly blessed to have been put here in this place.
So Tom, I'm curious. I mean, I have to fully admit, I tell people I'm a LA boy, East LA to be exact, you know, so I'm very urban. I grew up urban. You know, my appreciation for the rural small town area was when I was stationed up in Grand Forks, North Dakota for a while, you know, up in North Dakota and Minnesota. However, and so you mentioned the fact that, you know, when you hear about urban, you know, polarization or anger or what, you know, and things that you see in the urban settings, I have to say that from an urban perspective growing up, I always viewed the rural small town area as rowdy, you know, bar scene, you know, you say the wrong word and there goes the bottle of flashing drinks and people start, you know, so, you know, so that perspective, how true is that perspective in your area in Pennsylvania? I mean, you know, because I think we have perceptions from urban to rural and rural to urban. So tell me a little bit about that perception that the rural is actually, you know, and, you know, sometimes being a person of color, you know, we have some reticence of what small town rural life is. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, well, of course, you know, again, I'll use an animal reference. I always say that animals don't see color. And you will see cats laying down with dogs and chickens and other species as well. And again, it comes out of that respect and mutual relationship that has been built out of the element of trust. And so that's kind of what the community is about. And yes, that doesn't mean we agree with everything each other says. We can agree to disagree, but it's not all right to be disagreeable. There's a difference there. There's a line.
Right.
And I think we have to respect each other's viewpoints enough to finish the conversation. And so I think that our world today doesn't communicate enough. And I always say that communication is a two-way street. It's more than you just doing all the talking. You have to listen as well as talk. And I often refer to the fact that God gave us one mouth and two ears and two eyes and two nostrils. So we need to take in information from a lot of different sources than what we spew out.
Good point. Good point. And considering, Tom, that you know, multi-generational, for you, so your church was before it became the United Church of Christ, and how did you come about being involved with UCC?
Well, interesting. I really got more involved in UCC when I was confirmation age. I actually, my father was a Lutheran and my mother was a Reformed. And so I started out in a Reformed church, but then when I got into middle school, I'd say, all of my friends were Lutheran. So I went to Sunday school with my Lutheran friends. My grandparents, my grandfather was a Reformed, my grandmother was a Lutheran. So when I got ready to join the church, I started feeling sorry for my grandfather because nobody was over there to sit with him. So I went back across the street and joined the Reformed Church. And so I was there in 1957 when we stood and took the vote together as to become a part of the United Church of Christ. So, and there's a lot of split families in the town of Berlin. But after I married my first wife, my father said, well, I see the writing on the wall, and he moved his membership across the street and came and met with the rest of the family. So we got together at that point. So that's how communities come together. I had I'm currently serving as the president of our local church consistory, and last Sunday I welcomed an 86-year-old couple into our membership who moved their membership from Virginia down near Washington, D.C. And they literally were kind of excommunicated from that town in Virginia because they flew the American flag. And so they were happy to find a rural community that would accept them into their congregation. So we're open, accepting, we welcome everybody, and we seem to be kind of thriving. We went through the pandemic with everybody else, but that did create some opportunities to be creative and make some changes in our world and in the way we have church. So I think necessity is the mother of invention. That kind of put us into that mindset. And even though they say we can't change, we can change.
Thank you, Tom. You're another person that's been coming to the coalition, the STAR coalition meetings for almost from the beginning. How being on the board in the UCCB, how are you been able to bring concerns and the gifts from the Star churches to the UCC wider church on the board?
Well, I don't know that I'm all that successful yet, but I keep looking for opportunities to help have conversations and have respectful conversations where people can truly sit down and listen to one another and come together with our ideas and form ways. I try to, I'm a layperson, but I think of things that I've been taught from my Bible studies and going to Sunday school and so forth. And one of the keys, I believe, is that we love our neighbors and judge not that ye may also be judged. And don't judge other people by what they think or what they do. We're all going to have to stand at the pearly gates and be judged on our behavior. And of course, we're all sinners. We all make mistakes. We all have done dumb things in our life. So, but we're all going to have to stand for what we've done. And we repent from that. And so we're not all that different. We're not perfect. We're trying to get better.
That's the point, right? Trying to get better. And then another thing, of course, because we have such a large tent of theological perspectives, I hear what you're saying, and the concept of sin or judgment, is a great conversation that I think we should explore further of what that means for us. So Tom, thank you so much for sharing, but I want to open it up for the three of you with this general question, is that what are your hopes and dreams for the Star Churches and Ministries, going forward? And I'm going to start with you, Tom. What are your dreams about this Star Coalition?
Well, I think as we come together, we learn from one another. And it's a very spontaneous kind of conversation. And my eyes get opened every time I attend one of the meetings because of how creative other churches are. And we can help each other try new things and share successes and failures and just have that energetic, spontaneous conversation. And it's very free flowing. And it's, as Bonnie said, it's spontaneity and there's no power struggle there. It's all very contributory and very positive. And it gives us hope. And that's some of the things that our local churches, our small churches especially, have trouble finding the hope. And so if we can help to find it and give them that hope, why they can get some new energy and they can do God's work. And I remind people all the time that God chose 12 disciples. So that wasn't a big group that went out to do his work, or Jesus chose them. And so we can do things with small groups and you can serve God in the local setting.
Nice, Tom. Nice. Thank you. Amelia, same question for you.
My hopes and dreams are that eventually it becomes less of us and them, that the real joys of the small town experience can be shared. There's been a great deal in the chat about how a lot of small towns are not safe for LGBTQA people. A lot of small towns are not safe for people of color. And I mourn that and I grieve that. It's a change that is going to take time and energy to occur. what happens in a small town is no more a monolith than what happens in East LA or Washington, DC or Baltimore. There are places in all three of those towns I would not walk at night. There are places here I wouldn't walk at night. But there are also places here that people literally do not have locks on their doors. The houses, it's just built that way. They don't feel they need them. And how we make a bridge between those two things, I do not know. But both of those realities are true. And we're all people. We're all human beings who seek relationship, who seek respect, who want to be heard and listened to. Those are two completely different things. And we all have experiences and knowledge and joys and griefs that we want to share with our sisters and brothers. And working in a place where many people are related, I see both the best and the absolute worst of familiar relationships. But at the, it's a trite phrase, but at the end of the day, we all do need each other. You know, some people need the gifts that I can bring. I need the gifts other people can bring. There's 3 people that need the gifts that come from across the river. And when it is no longer a fearful thing to seek those things out, and you can be vulnerable with our sisters and brothers, then we're spreading the gospel. That we're a bunch of people around a very, very, very big table at which there's always room for one more person because we're all hungry and we just want to share some bread.
Thank you, Amelia, for that authentic and reality check that we do need, that we need as a wider church. Bonnie, how about you?
Well, you know, I've been responding to comments in the chat, and I've been responding to questions in the
Thank you.
Q&A,
Thank you.
and it's been really interesting to see our similarities and differences across the entire church, right? You might not hear about some forms of violence in the small town where you are, that you might hear on the news that's happening in the urban center near where you are. That doesn't mean violence isn't happening. Doesn't mean that hate's not there. It doesn't mean that fear isn't there. I want the church, my goal and dream for the church is that we can become a brave space.
Amen.
Not just a safe space, but a brave space where we can say to each other when we've crossed a line, a boundary to make someone else safe. When we can say to each other, hey, wait a minute, we're supposed to be loving each other. When we can say to each other, I have this gift, how can I share it with you? And you're telling me that you have this gift, will you share it with me? Because I think that's what church community is about. Sometimes the voice of the small town and rural church gets drowned out by other voices. That doesn't mean our voices are perfect, and it doesn't mean our voices aren't flawed. It simply means we have a voice that isn't always heard in the room or at the table. And so my hope is that we can hear the voices, that we can all have a seat at the table. Or, as my colleagues in other nations remind me, a seat in the circle, because not everyone has a table. So could we all be in the circle together, striving to follow Jesus, loving ourselves and our local churches so that we have the capacity to love each other? That's my goal for the coalition, that we can be an instrument of that.
Well, I want to thank you, Bonnie. I want to thank you, Amelia and Dom, for it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the conversations that I'm sure we in the United Church of Christ and the wider church are having. Thank you, everyone, for coming and being part of this conversation and for your comments and your questions. This is a 3-week series that we're hosting, and I'm looking forward to meeting with Vicar Lisa Robinson, who will be, she and I will be having a one-on-one on what it means to be an ecumenical pastor. She pastors a UCC as well as a ELCA, a Lutheran congregation out in Iowa, outside of Iowa Falls. And we're gonna be talking about how she navigates the differences between the theologies as well as the community values, and how she is called, how she is able to bring justice-minded issues, but also understanding where the folks are, in their communities. So that's next week. And then on March 7th, we're going to be privileged. My colleague and I, Reverend Ellie Hutchison, and I are going to be, I don't want to say, cross-examine or anything. But we're going to have some fun conversation. Well, some real conversation by Reverend Les Parmenter and Reverend Coral Parmenter from Nebraska, who's going to be asking us questions of what the rural and small town churches want to know about national. Who are we? What are we? And how we are able to engage in a relationship from between our churches.
And Roberto, thank you for that. Your registration link for today is going to work for all of the upcoming Nurture the Soul webinars for the small and rural church. So please do save this. We'd love to have you back. And as always, we are grateful for your presence, your gifts, and your questions. Thank you for being with us today and all along the way. Join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul, and look for those special offerings from time to time. Again, as a reminder, we're always trying to produce opportunities to engage you, and you can find a full list of upcoming digital programming offerings at ucc.org/events or any of our social media platforms. And if you missed it up front, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Thank you for your prayerful and financial support. It helps programs like this. It helps get the word of the local, small, and rural church out there, y'all. I heard you loud and clear today. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and authentic. And Roberto, thank you for helping to usher and minister alongside these beautiful humans today.
And before we leave, I'm going to have each of our panelists, Bonnie, Amelia, and Tom, give us a sentence of benediction as a farewell. Bonnie, you first.
My friends, during this season of Lent, may you feel God surround you, and may you walk in the footsteps of Jesus, ministering to all you meet.
Tom, you're next.
Blessings to all of you. Hope to see you on the next trip.
Thank you. And Pastor Amelia.
May God bless you and keep you. May the Lord of the forest and the trees of spirit and love fill us, motivate us, hold us, and send us. And God's people said, Amen.
Amen.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.